I don't need to introduce either of you. She's already done it. Now, my first question would be to you. What is the Indian knowledge paradigm right now?
Namaskaram to the August gathering. With respect to the Indian education system, one, what we are as of now. So, we largely people who are seated in this auditorium are recipients of the current day Indian education system. So, the session says paradigm shift. So, when I look at the Indian education system, that is quite desirable where we look into the past. There are three quick parameters which I feel will matter a lot when infused into the current Indian education system. One is an integrated approach to understanding and disseminating knowledge. For example, in the due course of singing poetry, Aryabhatta just says Chaturadhika Shatam Ashtagunam Dvasashti Ayutascha, 62,832 divided by 20,000, which is 3.14, which is the pi value. Use it in constructing an altar. So, in the due course of speaking about Agnihotra, he just spells out pi value. Sthiragasa Samaradhya Vikatata Matamata, Vedanta Deshika in the 13th century, just in the course of describing the holy sandals of the Lord, solves the oiler's problem just in a fluke. When Kaushalya has to send Rama on an exile for 14 years to the forest, she says, use this ring made of Santana Karani, which is a herb. So she talks botany there. When Hanuman has to bring 4 different herbs, though it's not the binomial nomenclature of calling it a chlorophytum borivilianum, 4 different herbs are mentioned with the names. So there's botany. And when the Setu is being constructed, the saltwater crocodiles, which are very specific to the Bay of Bengal, are mentioned. So the point I'm trying to make is, as poetry flows, science and maths naturally flow. Today, Wordsworth and Miles to Go Before I Sleep is reserved for 12 to 1 session in the schools after lunch. And Pythagoras theorem is mentioned for 9 to 10 because what gives you food is 9 to 10 and not 12 to 1 is what is largely believed. So people often ask me, after having undergone engineering at Pilani, how did you turn into a philosopher? I say that's what made me a philosopher. So engineering is what makes a few philosophers. It may make a lot of them in the future too. So that's one. That's the integrated approach. Second, very quickly, is the logical approach. When Hanuman hasn't seen Sita, he hasn't seen a profile pic, her profile is locked, he hasn't seen how she looks. He goes to Lanka and spots her. That time, Valmiki says, Tarkayamasa Siteti. Through logical reasoning, he got to know this is Sita. A lot of things are deployed where her missing pallu and her sari matches, the border matches, everything, all of that happens. So logical reasoning, which is Tarka Shastram, was integral to the Indian education system that was desired in the past. So if we have to infuse that into the current day, it will be a lot more beneficial. And the last part, with respect to the Indian education system that is desirable, that should undergo a paradigm shift, is the Guru-Sishya relationship. So whenever we look into the scriptures of the past of this land, we speak of Vasishtha Rama, Vishwamitra Rama, Valmiki and Lavakusha, Drona and Arjuna, Arjuna and Krishna, Sandipani and Krishna. So there is always a beautiful relationship, a symbiotic relationship, an organic relationship that has been existed and that has been revered in the past. So these are the 3 approaches which I feel, to your question of the Indian education system, that is desirable, and to the topic which says paradigm shift.
Great. Now, he has mentioned the Ramayana, the Puranas, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think you would classify them as history or myth?
I cannot see some of them as history with the available evidence, and I don't want to really go into trying to find evidence as well, because it's faith, and to somebody who believes that this had happened, I don't want to go and fight with them saying no, show me, etc. I have a slightly different perspective on that, and I don't want to really pick battles with people, because I really respect people who have faith in something, right? But the message in them can be a guiding light for me. not necessarily the historic truth. Right? I can, I don't even have to really talk to somebody saying, this is allegorical and it's meant for something else, because I don't know either whether they were meant to be allegorical or whether they were actual facts. I don't want to even go into that. But the content in them is quite interesting to me and educational to me, and that is enough for me, because I am not that deeply devotional like quite a few people are, but I respect them for that.
Okay, so now let's kind of, education depends a lot on a combination of science and history. And it's said that history begins sometime 3,500 years ago when they found the first Sumerian tablets. So education, as you said, I mean, it's really amazing lessons, messages, maybe even calculations, maybe scientific reflections of what is being seen today as fact. But you can't teach people based on faith. You teach, at least till now, you teach people based on empirical proof. So when you are talking about the Pythagoras theorem being reflected in our ancient systems, how do you provide the written documentary evidence of that as a truth to be taught?
Okay. So with respect to history, with respect to empirical proof, and with respect to substantiation through a lot of other corroborative proof, let's say of the 1371, there is an inscription on the eastern wall of Srirangam which talks about the return of a certain deity after an invasion. It records that the verse in the eastern wall is attributed to a poet called Vedanta Deshika. So there are surmounting proof to say that he lived during that part between 1268 and 1369 largely.
No, the return is dated to 1260s?
For
or
example?
the inscription is dated?
The inscription, which is dated, also mentions the poet's lifetime. So it says Sarvadhari Varsham, this particular year, this particular day. So the presence of that particular poet is established, or that particular personality is established. Alongside, we have a lot of evidence from the inscriptions of Sringeri about a person called Vidyaranya who had a conversation with Vedanta Deshika. So there is more than one proof to say that this person existed. And alongside, there is proof that he has also composed a work. And based on that work, I was also an Indian Academy of Sciences fellow at the Indian Institute of Science. So there was a conclave that was to understand the ancient mathematical systems. So in that particular system, there was a paper presented as to how his verses have solved a certain problem called the Knight's Tour problem of the 18th century, 600 years before even there was a solution thought for it. So there is proof. But one thing that the knowledge systems of the Indian past has always done is to never largely package it and market it the way that we want to see it, the way we want to see it. So probably if a committee is constituted, probably such education systems, I do agree that faith is not something to be coaxed on a certain person. But learnings from the past is not faith. It's a moment that we cherish of the past. So for example, if there is a concept that has been mentioned in our scriptures which is relatable to the sciences today, you can strip off the extra religious elements and see it only as a concept. So that is perfectly okay.
How long back do the Vedas and the Puranas go?
For example, there is the work of Bhasa called Abhisheka Nataka, which is dated to the 2nd century BC. So Bhasa in Abhisheka Nataka talks about Valmiki. So Valmiki must have existed before 2nd century BC, 1. So when we talk of knowledge systems, we also talk about sound, because a large section of the Indian knowledge system that we have bequeathed is in the form of sound. It's called Shruti and Smriti. So when it is oral culture, we cannot exactly date it to this particular year, this particular month.
See, oral culture is not something which we can trust, right? I mean, it's something which can, passed on from tribe to tribe, from family to family. It takes on its own transmutation,
True.
right? Now, if you're saying that Valmiki dated two years before Christ. or
Yeah,
200
yeah, very
years
much,
before.
very much.
I'm dating the earliest.
No, I would rather call it BCE, not BC.
Okay,
Yeah.
10 years BC, whatever.
Yeah.
So let's say that the earliest written documents,
Ah.
which were the Sumerian documents, is 3,500 years old, which is 3,488 years before.
Yeah,
this,
but
right?
one thing about
no,
the
no, hang on, let me
Sumerian,
just
yeah.
finish. So the Sumerian documents are concerned the administration and the economic affairs of the time of the empire. Now, if something could be that exact in writing 3,200 years ago, why do no documents exist in exact proof of life, teachings, etc.? Is it because documents were destroyed? I have no idea. But this is a question I am curious about.
There is something called as the ethos to a civilization. For example, there is an inbuilt ethos to every civilization. If the ethos is strong, that civilization lasts. So even if I'm not dating the 3rd century and the 2nd century BC, the civilization lasts. I don't know if the Sumerian civilization that you speak about is lasting in those territories or the landscape has completely changed. So we just have the document. So because the ethos of the civilization is so strong and a lot of it has gone into the oral culture, the civilization still exists. At least I'm here to talk about it. So we talk about Sumerian civilization from the records available. I don't know what is a big demographics that's following that civilization till now. So they may have started as a civilization that is documenting everything on paper, on inscriptions. Yeah, but the Indian civilization education system has largely been oral. Largely, I would say oral. The documentation part came much, much later.
Yeah, but the Mohenjo-daro time, there was documentation, if I'm not mistaken, all the cuneiform
To
scripts,
some extent, we have the seal from the IVC, we have the Pashupati seal, all of that. I think even Badri will agree. Some of the Pashupati seals that we have got from the Indus Valley civilization, the metallurgical, there's a dancing bronze from IVC. Some of it is available, but not the exact knowledge system, not exactly the scriptures that we find from the IVC.
Okay, so do you agree with the current educational pattern, the current way education is perceived, or it has been perceived, or is going to be perceived? What is do you have a manifesto, a roadmap?
I have a lot of disagreements and problems with the current education system. It's difficult job to list all of them and debate. Just 2 or 3 points. The one point that Dushyanth Sridhar made about education in the ancient times was more teacher-centric. It has become institution-centric today, right? The teacher chose what to teach, who to take as students, what to impart to that particular student. It's not possible today. The institution chooses who they are taking as students. They are uniformly spread across a bunch of teachers. I'm talking only about the higher education system, right? And because of which there are plenty of problems. Now, if you take a place like the US, for example, a lot of the early Indian ethos, and I'm not even talking about Vedic age, etc. To me, there's a lot of evidence available from, let's say, 3rd, 4th century CE to about 16th, 17th century CE. I'm talking about roughly about 1500 years, where there's a lot of written record available to answer your question. Yeah. I do have records and I can understand what was happening over that period of time. Now today in a US university, a lab is quite autonomous. You can even write to the professor and get admitted to that particular institution, provided you have that basic minimum qualification required to be accepted by that graduate school. No, not here. You cannot do that. A good, very popular professor who can get a lot of funding, who is very popular, will have a huge student base. Taking US as an example. And somebody who is either not interested in teaching or is not good may not have students at all. Well, that's not the case here, right? We have shifted considerably away in the Indian education system. The other thing is that the autonomy given to teachers. Again, here syllabus is more or less prescribed, textbooks are prescribed, they're just thrust down on the teachers, except for few institutions which can set up their own syllabus, build their own curriculum, figure out their own teaching method, can have exams thrown away, and instead, for example, IIT Madras will have a lot more of autonomy compared to say some other institution. That is, in the ancient Indian model, it was complete autonomy to the teacher, right? So is it possible to replicate that today? There are some challenges, but a lot of those ideas can be borrowed, institutionalized even today. I'll add only one more point, right? I'm seriously interested in the Indian mathematicians, and I've been doing a lot of work in trying to understand their work. People have been extremely honest. I mean, we have solid name and work starting from Aryabhatta. Before that, we have some works, but we don't really know who wrote it, and there are some names. But let us start with Aryabhatta. The next great mathematician, somebody called Brahmagupta, severely criticizing Aryabhatta openly in his very core text itself. They were not mincing words. They were using extremely harsh words. And later on, somebody like Bhaskaracharya too, he has very great regard for Brahmagupta, but yet criticizes him on a certain aspect, very openly, very clearly. The intellectual honesty that was shown was tremendous, right? Now that is not there today. I mean, you cannot openly criticize the work of another school, another professor, your own colleague, because then you will somehow be taken care of somewhere. No, that was not the case then. And we have it right through. I mean, whether it is in Vedanta philosophy, or in mathematics, or in medicine, every manuscript we have, if we go through them, the level of openness and intellectual honesty shown in seriously criticizing and agreeing, that is somehow something that we have lost.
Because the current system is still young. I mean, they're in power young. I mean, when you're just starting out, there's a bit of insecurity. You're finding your feet. You give offense very quickly. I think that if it continues another 50 years, it will become more democratic than it is. And that's my study.
We hope. So if you want to know what we can take from the available evidence to us, I'm talking only from available evidence from, let's say, something like a 5th century to 17th century CE, I would say take these things and much more.
Just to add to what you said, you just said that the Indian current education system is quite young, maybe in the years to come.
No, I'm talking about right now.
Right now, exactly.
The right wing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with it. I mean,
No,
there's nothing wrong with the right wing.
No, what I thought was, if there is an education system with the flaws, the existing flaws today, it's easier to correct with the learnings of the past, because there is a saying in Tamil, "Aindil valayadadu, aimbadil valayadu." So what can be corrected now is
So
the
the
best.
current education system is basically based on the British educational system. I mean, in addition to it, there's a certain amount of left garnishing there. But I am talking about the new understanding of education, where there are nationalist elements in it, there are kind of political elements in it, which gets hypersensitive, if I'm not mistaken, about certain things. There are also a lot of absurd things going on, like people riding on little bluebirds and running out of prison. But that aside, I think right now they're very young. I mean, it's only about 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. So by the time it becomes an institutionalized thing, like the current one is, I think people are more relaxed to open think to this.
See, I don't think it's been institutionalized or formalized. In my humble opinion, in the last 5 years, I'm just giving you an example of Professor Ramasubramaniam, who is with the IIT Bombay, and he's much older than the number of decades that have passed, and he's doing a yeoman service in bringing Madhava series of the Sangama Grammar School of the 12th and the 13th century, much earlier than the Infinite series that we know of. So there's proper proof that studies are happening. Probably it's coming to light in the 4 or 5 years. That's how I would rather put it.
Okay, all right. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I read somewhere that you always felt like an outsider.
Outsider to?
I mean, an outsider to society, an outsider in college education system, etc.
See, I have been educated in some of the best educational institutions in India and the US. But somewhere I moved away from the core, mechanical engineering that I studied. With completely got involved in something to do with cricket, and now I'm doing publishing. So in a sense, I'm completely away from academics. Right?
Yeah, but what I read about both at Cornell and IIT and Cornell, you felt like an outsider, and English had a bit to do with it, if I was not mistaken. Not you then, but No, let me just finish. So, English is not really a colonial language anymore. I mean, English is an international linked language. I mean, so the whole assault on English, which is connected with Indian victimhood. And I remember discussing about Tamil victimhood, that the Tamils reject the North Indian gestalt and as a result they feel this victimhood. And if I'm not, but actually if we look at historically, the North Indians have greater victimhood than the Tamils, because, I mean, they say they're victims of Mughal invasions, Islamic invasions, Greek invasion, this invasion, that invasion, and actually they have faced the larger brunt of the invasions. Right. So we are a subcontinent of victimhood, right? So in that situation, isn't it much better to link language between cultures to understand this victimhood if it's necessary? Or can it take it forward? I mean, when I was in college, political science, we were given the Communist Manifesto was one of the things to study. Now, I have no idea why, because you wouldn't have taken political science if you were not interested and read the Communist Manifesto. Now, why can't Arthashastra be taught along, no, not just alone. Why can't it be taught as a comparative treatise with Machiavelli and Sun Tzu? I mean, the thing is that when you look at education, we are, I think, restricting ourselves into one, because there are parallel channels, there are parallel works, which actually, like you said, which mirror each other, because civilization is actually a history of mirrors. What is in one reflection goes on like that. So to connect both these streams, how would you kind of do that?
Well, you've asked lots of things packed into that. So let me just take a couple of points there. There is a strong lobby in India which controls education, the left lobby, which doesn't value Indian knowledge systems at all. Whether it is Arthashastra or Ashtadhyayi or the large amount of compendium of mathematics to astronomy to medicine to chemistry and dance, music, these are all written documents. Architecture, this large body of indigenous literature, they are written documents. That is not talked about at all, right? On couple of counts. They are either simply dismissed as regressive because it will have some Brahminical ideas embedded in it, right? Or anyway you have the modern educational system with modern content which is sort of superseded all these old stuff, even if it had some value about which I have no idea because I have not really presented it to people. I will simply take what is already there and let us just go on with it because we want to be progressive, right? There's a huge fallacy there in this whole problem. First of all, there is a large amount of content across multiple fields, right? I'm not here to even try to establish what is out there, why it is superior, that's later. But we should really be introducing them, not just Arthashastra along with Communist Manifesto, but for every field in every classes that you are really teaching. There is equivalent material, some of which wrong, right? For various reasons. For example, alchemy was practiced by, all over the world, including by Newton, right? A Newtonian scholar will not make fun of Newton, which he thought at that time that one material, one element could be converted to another. Indians thought so too. It took quite some time into early 20th century to really understand that that is not really possible. But it gave rise to fantastic chemistry. So and let us understand that there were mistakes. I'll just add one more thing, right? Aryabhatta, in giving formulas, gives accurately the formula for area of a triangle, but makes a mistake in providing volume of a tetrahedron or any three-dimensional object. Likewise, he gives correct formula for area of a square, but makes a mistake for giving the volume of a sphere. This is perfectly okay because it's a tougher problem and it takes few centuries to fix them, right? So it's perfectly okay to study even something that is wrong. After all, we studied Dalton's atomic model, then Rutherford's atomic model before we come to the quantum model and the standard model of what we have today, right? So it's perfectly okay, but we must be reading all of this and not reject them, because there is so much of wisdom packed into this, and also the approach to solving various problems. Very distinct. Again, I don't know if I can explain it in detail, but I'll take only one aspect of it. Indians from Aryabhatta to Brahmagupta and subsequently Bhaskara solved fairly tough algebraic problems. Again, I'm sorry, I'm taking more of mathematical examples. Around 1,000 years before these problems were solved in Europe. They are first order
Europe didn't have an intellectual tradition at all.
linear indeterminate equations and quadratic indeterminate equations. These were solved in 6th, 5th century and 7th, 6th century respectively, whereas it took later Euler, Lagrange and all those people in the 17th, 18th centuries, right? But the approach to solving entirely different. You still get the same answer. But what is taught in schools today, if at all it's taught, will be the later methods, not the Indian methods. So we are losing so much by not bringing the entire set of Indian knowledge systems into school curriculum. And the fault lies with us, including people like me, right? We should be writing, people like Ramasubramanian and Srinivas and Sriram and so many others, they are doing it, but it's not enough. So much has to be done to bring the Indian knowledge systems to schools and colleges, and then you change the syllabus completely. The same subject, but different approaches. What was done in India, with respect to law, with respect to, study the Dharma Shastras, not to follow them today. How were they solving a particular problem?
Application.
Right? Compared to what the Roman law is, what the common law system is. Combine all of them, understand, and then change.
I'm getting, science. Last question, very important question. Like, I'm listening to your journey from elitist institutions to your current social, or let's say communicative sensibility. How do you what's your prescription for de-leftifying Indian education? And don't give me the Sanskrit things because I don't understand it. But seriously, I mean, what is your prescription to de-leftify Indian education?
The word is
I'm saying de-leftify, I can't think of a better word.
Okay, so to de-leftify, the answer is not to rightify it, but to present one side of the knowledge system that we have bequeathed, which has never been presented in the past. That's what he was telling. So it's very, very important that we present both sides.
Very good.
And I'm sure people are, at least in the higher education system, people are judicious enough to take the essence, the quintessence of it and decide for themselves. So the right way to de-leftify is to present knowledge as is, which is too theoretical and too perfect to look at. There may be some amount of rightifying also, but I feel that rightifying should be given a chance that leftifying has happened for decades.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm told the time is up, so thank you very much for a very engaging and sparkling discussion.